It was the summer of 2017, and I had just started to transition from being seen as male to being the female who I knew that I always was. Luckily, I lived in a small, comfortable, warm, open-minded town. That town was Charlottesville, Virginia. First came the KKK, this ragtag group of old white men wearing wizard robes, of all things. In my privilege, I didn't see them as a threat. Then came the white nationalists, the neo-Nazis, the white-shirted, usually young men with torches burging into the University of Virginia and the downtown mall, ending in the death of one individual and many others violently harmed. I knew at that point my town and the nation had changed. Luckily, I had a safe place, an inpatient psychiatric unit of all places. I was training to be a psychiatric nurse. And there I was learning how to do a good assessment, how to counsel, how to do education, and it came to my time to do an admission. And I had been doing these before, no problem. There was about a 30-year-old man down in the emergency department. He had some symptoms of trauma. This would be kind of a cakewalk. Really, we would do some mindfulness, some grounding exercises, we'd get him comfortable, and we'd be on our way. And then I read the chart, and I looked down. And he had taken place in that very rally that the neo-Nazis were at. And he was not on my side. My preceptor and my mentor, who both were really looking out for me, especially during this transitional time, did not want me taking this patient, and they really tried to stop me. And I thought about it, and I thought about it a lot. See, I was a philosophy major in undergrad. In the end, I came down to the conclusion that I would never want somebody to treat me differently based on how I look or what I thought. So I proceeded with the admission. Within about 30 minutes or so, Henry ended up on our floor. Now, Henry, as he walked through the second set of locked doors, was around 6 feet tall, had a bald-shaved head, had large muscles, and had swastika tattoos on his knuckles. And then there's me. I don't bench press. So I was hesitant, took a deep breath, walked slowly, and invited him into the unit. I took him back to our vital room with another nurse. We began to do his vitals. And it was during that time I encountered a familiar feeling that I had known before my transition, disassociation. I began to go on autopilot as a method of protecting myself. And it was right then that I realized, no, I want to be here. I want to be with Henry. And so I followed my breath, I grounded, and I brought myself back to the present moment. I then began to give Henry a tour of the unit, taking him to his room. And as I walked with him, I noticed the nurse that was doing that initial assessment was gone. It was just Henry and I. And as we got to Henry's room, and I welcomed him in, and as that door closed, my hand grew pretty tight on my emergency call bell. I did not know what was going to happen next. Inside the room, due to hospital administration, all the chairs were gone, and so we only had 2 beds. And they were about 4 feet apart. So he sat on one, I sat on the other, and as I sat there with my fist kind of clenching this emergency bell, I waited for his barrage of insults and for his barrage of fists. But neither of that came. Instead, tears streaming down his face. I asked him what was wrong. He had begun to recount this sexual and physical abuse that happened to him that had just flooded back into his memory. As I sat there, my preceptor peeked in the door, making sure I was okay, this big burly Scottish guy. And I looked back, and Henry was staring at the ground. Henry was disassociating, a common trend in trauma victims. Something had changed. So I looked back to my preceptor and I said, I think you should actually leave right now. My preceptor was hesitant, but agreed. And I looked back to Henry to ask him what was wrong. Couldn't answer at first. I asked him to look me in the eyes. We began to breathe together, and eventually he was able to tell me that he was abused by another man, and that when he was in Charlottesville on that day, he had seen someone else, a person of color, being beaten over and over again in a parking garage. And those memories all came back to him, like a flashback in that moment. And he couldn't bear to be around other men, and he couldn't bear to be around himself, so he ran away, and the thoughts of suicide creeped in that continued on until he was there. And then he looked at me, and he said, I can't be around that man, but I can be around you. Now, I don't think Henry fully understood the weight of those words. I don't even think he knew that I was trans, but I sure appreciated that. It was at that moment where there was another first encounter that I experienced. See, Henry and I, we talked about justice, we talked about trauma, we talked about resilience, and maybe even the possibility of hope. But there, I noticed something different. I had been told my entire life, when being socialized as a male, that I had to be brave and courageous, and I never felt that. In that moment, I could be compassionate, I could be kind, but it was truly at that moment that I was able to encounter my courage. Thank you very much.